Alrighty, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Daphne. I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library, and my co-host today is Cindy Warwick, who is in charge of our Author Talk series. Today we have with us Samuel Still, who's going to give us a presentation on the Still family, and I'll let Cindy do the proper introduction. I just want to go over a few housekeeping items before we jump into that. We will be taking your questions at the end of the program today, but you can submit them at any time using the questions box in the GoToWebinar dashboard. For those of you who might not be familiar, this is what your dashboard should look like if you are using a PC or a Mac. If you are using a mobile device, your interface is going to look a little bit different, but all of the features will still be there. First and foremost, in the top here is your audio section. This is where you can check to make sure that your computer audio is connected properly. If for whatever reason you have to change audio devices, make sure that the audio device under the speakers matches up with the device that you're using. If you have any questions or any problems and you can't figure something out, you're running into any problems, there is a raise hand button here that you can click on. That'll alert me. I will send you a message in GoToWebinar, and hopefully I'll be able to resolve that problem for you. And as I mentioned before, any questions for the host or for our presenter, Samuel, you can do them in the questions box here. Just type them in, hit send, and we'll be happy to answer them for you. So that is everything that I have for you. So I'm going to turn it over to Cindy for the introduction.
Hi, everyone. It's good to have you with us today, and I hope everyone's doing well. And thank you for joining us to celebrate Black History Month. Along with this presentation, we have another webinar that's going to be coming up on the 23rd of February. It's entitled A Rich Legacy, The History of My Enslaved Ancestors. And with that one, Ruth D. Wright is going to talk about how she traced her ancestry of her second great-grandparents in the late 1800s. And that'll be from noon to 1 p.m. on the 23rd of February. Another little advertisement, just short. If you enjoy these and the webinars, if you enjoy these talks and the webinars, as well as we have great resources at the State Library. This month is not just Love Your Library Month, but for New Jersey libraries, it's called Snapshot Month. And during that, we try to collect information on how our patrons use the library's services, resources, and programmings. And it's in order to have data that we can present to local and state officials to show the necessity of libraries in general and the state library in particular. It helps in with the budget in that. So if you could, if you get the email newsletter, you have my my email there. I am at cwarrick, WARRICK at njstatelib.org. So, if you feel that you could write us a sentence or something that we might be able to keep and use to show how important our library is, that would be great during this month, which is Snapshot Month. Our next talk is on March 3rd, and that's going to be for Women's History Month. And it's with a lady called Cheryl Woodruff Brooks. And she's going to talk about the Golden Beauty boss, Sarah Spencer Washington, who was one of the first Black millionaires back in the 1940s. And Madam Washington was recognized for her work at the 1939 New York World's Fair. And last year, she was inducted into the New Jersey Hall of Fame. So I don't know a lot about her, but she sounds like a pretty impressive lady and would like to know about her. So that's going to be our talk on March 3rd. Today's talk, here we are, is on some well-known individuals in South Jersey. At least I know the name. I've known the name probably since the time I could understand words, because I do live close to the Pine Barrens and that. So I've heard of the Still family, but nothing like Samuel Still III is going to be telling us today. And he's going to give us an insight into his family's significance and its relevance to South Jersey history and to America's history in general. Samuel Still is directly related to William Still, the father of the Underground Railroad, through his third great-grandparents, Levin and Charity Still. At the age of 13, now listen to that age, people, because I wouldn't want to be doing a presentation at the age of 13. But he did. He began telling his family story in elementary schools in southern New Jersey. And as a child, he'd hike with his father in and around the Pine Barrens, where Levin and Charity had raised their 18 children. And as they visited the old family homestead and other places connected with their family history, as well as numerous family reunions and participating in them, he learned more and more of the family's history and its impact on the history of South Jersey. Let me tell you a little bit about Samuel, though. Samuel Still, he's a former U.S. Coast Guard commissioned officer, and we want to thank you for your service, Samuel, for that. He holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Architectural Engineering from North Carolina A&T State University. He's done significant research on his family, on Levin and Charity Still progeny, spending countless hours tracing his family ancestry through slavery into present day. And he's given many presentations at schools, universities, and for celebrations of Black History Month, as he's doing today. He was privileged to write the Still family preface in the 2005 edition of The Underground Railroad, a reprint of William Still's 1872 book. And he's also partnered with the South Jersey Historical and Cultural Center in reprinting a new edition of Early Recollections and Life of Dr. James Still and the Kidnapped and Ransomed Peter and Vina Still. To preserve his family's legacy and to make the public aware of the significance and relevance his family has had on South Jersey history, he collaborated with others to create the Dr. James Still Historical Office Site Association, for which he is the chairman. He's also an author, historian, preservationist, genealogist. I don't know where he gets time to sleep, construction project manager, motorcycle enthusiast, I'm there with you, and semi-professional photographer. And as a native New Jerseyan, he's passionate about telling his family history and sharing their importance in American history. And I just want to thank you for being with us today, Samuel, and I really look forward to this talk. And I'm sure that all our attendees do as well. Thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Cindy. Really, really great introduction. I don't know if I can top all that, but let's see. Let me get my screen situated here. Trying to minimize this so I can, there it goes. All right, so topic of the title of my presentation, also called The Legacy of an American Family, because my history, African-American history, is American history for the most part, for all of it, for much of it. So the first slide I have here is the headstone of Levin and Charity Still, which is out in Shimon. You'll see a name, Angelina and Beulah. Angelina was the first wife of Dr. James Still, and his first daughter, Beulah. As you see here, Angelina was died in 1838, and Beulah died a year later. And this is a small cemetery plot out in Shimon, not too far from 206. And it's said that Indian Joe Moore, who was a local Native American who lived in the area, was also buried in that cemetery. Picture to the left is a picture of William Still. In the middle is Dr. James Still and their brother Peter Still, who was left in slavery for over 40 years. And I'll talk a little bit about that history as I go along. But the first thing I like to try to do, I always kind of go and talk about the beginning of the slave trade in America and some important facts. I don't dive deep into the reasons, all the reasons why, and all the cruelty, because we all know it's pretty cruel. And that could be a whole nother topic. But we know in the 17th and 18th century, tea, coffee, and tobacco becomes the social patterns in England. It just wasn't for the wealthy, but became for mass consumption. England's consumption of sugar in 150 years increased 2,500% by the early 19th century. So there was a high demand for sugar. And sugar was processed from sugar cane. It was very labor intensive. In 1516, the sugar cane was first harvested and sent back to Spain from the West Indies. The slave trade began from the west coast of Africa. We know that in 1619, a Dutch ship transported 20 Africans to Jamestown, Virginia. What's interesting in New Jersey is that in 1664, concessions and agreement of 1664 offered 60 acres of land for every enslaved African imported into New Jersey, which helped increase the enslaved population in the state. And that was all helped to develop the country. Many people think that African history started with slavery, but better said, African history was interrupted by the transatlantic slave trade. Just kind of an overall picture of, where sugar, cotton, tobacco was shipped to. The enslaved Africans were captured and taken across to Atlantic Ocean, all through Brazil, all through the Caribbean, into the U.S. Major routes here. Just another slide of kind of depicting where people were coming from. All right, so in 1677, the first Quaker proprietors arrived in Burlington and Gloucester counties. We know that in 1683, John Hugg purchased from the proprietors 1,300 acres of land located in Gloucester County. Within the bounds of John Hugg Plantation was a small community of enslaved Africans known as Guineatown, located in the present-day Brooklawn, Belmore, and Mount Ephraim, New Jersey. 1761, the slave ship Hannah transported a cargo of enslaved Africans from the coast of Guinea and auctioned at the Delaware River. 1797, a Guineatown, a small community of freed slaves located within the area of the Hugg Plantation. We know that in 1800, 80% of Burlington County, New Jersey, and 90% of Gloucester County, New Jersey, the Black population were free. In 1884, New Jersey passed the Act of Gradual Abolition of Slavery. And what's interesting about that act was that until you were 21, if you were born of a slave, you had to be a slave until you turned to either the age of 21 as a female and 26 as a male. And those years were about, economically, was the break-even point that slave owners would break even on. They felt they would break even on why they taking care of their enslaved Africans. It's kind of odd, but that's how people thought back then. We know in 1861, the Civil War begins. The Confederate attacks Fort Sumter in South Carolina. We know in 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation issued by President Lincoln, it only freed the slaves in the states rebelling against the Union. And in 1865, the Civil War ends, and the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery throughout the nation. Some of the South Jersey family early beginnings. The Guineatown residents would later move into Snow Hill, which is Lawnside, present-day Lawnside. Some of those earliest West Jersey documented enslaved still families date back as far as 1752. Manumissions, Burlington County Deed Books, 1786 to 1800. There was a Philip Hope Candace Still manumitted on March 2nd, 1787. Their owner was Esther Wilkins in Eastham Township. Manumissions is basically a document saying that you were free. It was saying that you as a person were free. The Gloucester County Abolitionist Census in 1798 listed a free man of color, Tab Still, Cubit Still, James Still, John Still, and a Bonham Still. And that James Still is not the same family as of my descendants. We know that over 90 antebellum Black communities existed in South Jersey. And there were communities before the Civil War had begun. Places like Freehaven, Sadlertown, Snow Hill, Colemantown, Burlington, Petersburg, Little Texas, Clarksboro, and Indian Mills. Some of these areas are still, there are streets named for some of these areas. Like Little Texas, there's a street called Texas Avenue on Morristown Mount Laurel Road. And that was because of a community called Little Texas. Colemantown Cemetery, where Jacob's Chapel AME Church is located in Mount Laurel off of Elbow Lane. That's all part of it. That was a Black community right there where that church is today. And the key point too is that there were several still families that thrived in all these Black communities. Lebanon Charity Progeny beginnings. 1798, Levin Steele purchased his freedom from a young slave owner, William Wood. Sidney escapes twice from a man named Saunders. That was a nickname. His real name was Alexander Griffin. Levin and Sidney Steele arrived in Chemung, New Jersey. Sidney changed her name to Charity, and they modified their last name to Still in order to hide within the other free Still families. So essentially, my family was grafted into the Still families in South Jersey. So the sense there's two progenies in the area. Charity was claimed to have 18 children, but only there was 14 documented. They came from an area of Caroline County, Maryland, where this is the escape route, basically, using the Underground Railroad routes. They came across from Caroline County into Dover, crossed over to Delaware Bay, landed in an area called town called Greenwich. And in that area, Greenwich, there was a small Black community called Springtown, Othello. There was a historically AME church there, Bethel AME Church, one of the Bethel AME churches in the area. They went through Swedesboro into Mount Laurel, and that's where they met the other Still families and changed their last name. And then, in order to hide the fact that Charity was still a fugitive, they moved out to Chemung to hide out. Here's my third great grandfather's manumission. He was manumitted November 22nd, 1798, and it reads, I, William Wood of Caroline County in the state of Maryland, do hereby set free from bondage my Negro man called Levin Steele, aged about 24 years, and do for myself and my heirs, executors, and administrators release unto the said Levin Steele all my right and all claim whatsoever to a person, as to person or to any estate whatsoever may acquire, hereby declaring the said Negro man called Levin Steele absolutely free, without any interruption from me or any person claiming under me. A witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and seal this 22nd day, 11th month, 1798. And this is a copy of this actual photo of the actual document that I found doing my research down in Maryland, the archives. Here is a list of children that Levin and Charity still had. It was produced for their son, Peter Still, that was left in slavery when Charity went to escape. Charity had to escape twice. The second time the first time she got caught was dragged back down to the plantation. And then the second time she left, she had to make the horrible decision to leave two of her children. She left the two boys. And the thought was that the two boys would have a better chance of surviving slavery than did the two girls. As you see, Samuel Still was the first freeborn. My second great grandfather was the first freeborn of my family, born on February 26, 1807. You'll see Dr. James, look on down the list, April 9th, 1812, and you'll see William Still there, October 7th, 1821. And on this list is only 14. We figured the other 4 were probably stillborn at birth, because there's no mention of you in the name on those children. But the claim was that she had 18 children. It's kind of a better way you can read some of the names and list some more information on it. The patriarch Levin died December 24th, 1842. And from Levin's will, he bequeathed all the estate of after paying off any debts to his wife Charity. My second great grandfather Samuel was given a farm known as Cato Bounds. James was given a 7-acre parcel of land. The remaining personal property was divided among 6 remaining children: Mahala, Thompson, Katira Wilmore, Mary Still, Charles Wesley Still, and John Nelson and William Still. 1843, there were only 9 free and 1 still was enslaved. Note that Peter Still in 1843 was still enslaved in Alabama, and unbeknownst to the family that Levin Jr. passed away while enslaved on December 28th, 1831. There are 2 documents. These are affidavits, and to explain these kind of briefly is that there was a Charles Still that was born to Edward and Mahala Still that lived in Snow Hill or Lawnside at the time. Dr. James Still was well known in the area, and he was a lot of times he was family physician for other people. Well, evidently this Charles Still of Mahala and Edward Still was a patient of Dr. James Still. And he was hurt during the Civil War, and after the Civil War, he was trying to get a pension. And this document is an affidavit stating that there are no blood relations to Dr. James Still. And then Dr. James Still there on the right-hand side said he was no blood relation to the said Charles Still, so that this gentleman could get his pension. So in my research, I discovered there were 2 instances where the two separate progenies married into one another. In 1909, the marriage of Cupid M. Still III and Juanetta Still, granddaughter. Juanita was a granddaughter of Dr. James Still, and Cupid M. Still was a grandson of Cupid M. Still Sr. of Eastham, New Jersey. And then it was a prior in 1875, the marriage between a William Still and a Henrietta Still. William was traced back to possibly the Bowman Still family of Eastham, and Henrietta Still was a granddaughter of Levin Still, daughter of Samuel Still. So going in to speak about William Still and his involvement in the city of Philadelphia. It's a long list, and I probably will miss a few things, but just wow, what an amazing career he had living in Philadelphia. The picture that's to the far right is a picture of William standing outside of his coal merchant business at 1216, 1218, 1220 South Washington Street. So not only did he have just like an address, he had a whole block, and he had sold coal, land, ice, and stoves. He was quite a philanthropist, quite another civil rights activist. He authored the Underground Railroad in 1872. Real briefly, he began working at the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Office in 1847. He started working as a janitor and a mailroom clerk. William and Letitia, his wife, rented a home at 17 Ronaldson Street, which is present-day 625 South Delhi Street, from 1850 to 1855. This residence is still a privately owned residence, but what makes it so significant is that this home was considered a way house as part of the Underground Railroad. So you can imagine that people like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Lewis Tappan, Thomas Garrett, all those people would come through and visit the Still family at that home. William and Letitia often hid runaways and held meetings with key abolitionists at their home. The Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Office in 1852 was reorganized as a vigilance committee, and he was appointed the chairman. Now that vigilance committee was even more of a secret society within the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Office. They were the folks that came up with a lot of money and the tickets. They were sometimes very secretive and very, what do you want to call them, secretive investors, private investors, so that would be part of it. So William provided not only the network of hideouts, but also money, train tickets, food, medicine, lodging, and clothing for escaping enslaved Africans. Stills accounted for over 800 fugitives who received assistance during his 14 years of service at the Underground Railroad. Here's a picture of the house that William Still rented between 1850 and 1855. He assisted other abolitionists like Harriet Tubman, Lewis Tappan, Samuel Burris, Thomas Garrett, Lucretia Mott, and William Lloyd Garrison. Still created the network that Harriet Tubman used to free enslaved Africans. He was a vital part of her operating on Underground Railroad. If you've seen the movie Harriet, the gentleman, the actor Leslie Odom portrays my uncle, William Still. He also John Brown confided with Still about his plans 6 months prior to the raid on Harper's Ferry. Now, Still aided John Brown's accomplishments after the Harper's Ferry Rebellion. The Underground Railroad was the only document written of its time that kept accounts of fugitives. William kept those narratives. People would come into his office and he would ask them, where'd you come from? How did you travel here? Who was your owner? Was he nice? Were they mean? What family did you leave behind? And all that information was documented. And he had to keep those documents hidden in a crypt after 1850 because of the Great Compromise of 1850 that was done in Congress. Some of the noteworthy narratives are just phenomenal things to read about, and they're well known, but they're really interesting to read. Is the one about Jane Johnson, Henry Box Brown, and William and Ellen Craft are just a few of the ones that I talk about. Jane Johnson was traveling with her ambassador, her owner, who was an ambassador in Nicaragua at the time. She gets a note to William Still at his office saying that she wanted to be free. William Still goes down to the docks in Philadelphia with his friends. They whisk this woman away right in front of the owner. The owner, interestingly enough, was a good friend of the U.S. president. He was a U.S. ambassador, well-known individual from Virginia. And instead of the trial, when it went to go to court, it didn't even go through the city courts. It went straight to federal. And if you can imagine, the U.S. Marshals was on her owner's side, her previous slave owner. His name was Colonel Wheeler, was on his side working for him, and the Philadelphia police officers were on the side of the abolitionists. So you can imagine this woman comes back to court. She was the first African American to ever come back to come back to the city court and to give a testimony as an African American person. And if you can imagine, the U.S. Marshals on one side of the courtroom and the Philadelphia abolitionists, the Philadelphia police officers on the other side. As soon as she gave her testimony, the Philadelphia police officers had to jump, surround her, and escort her out the courtroom before the U.S. Marshals could get to her so they could drag her back to slavery. So you can imagine the commotion that must have been going on. The other one real briefly is Henry Box Brown. Henry Box Brown's family he lived in Virginia. His family got sold off. He didn't know where they were going to be, didn't know where they went to. So he decided that his best lot was to go ahead to try to escape. He befriended a white gentleman in Richmond who had a shop. They decided to box Henry Box Brown, who was 5'5", in a crate that was 2'8" by 2 foot by 3 foot. They marked on top of this box, this side up, and they sent it to Philadelphia to William Still's office. The box, through 27 hours of travel, pretty much was set upside down. And the story is that when he came out of it, when they opened the box, they didn't know whether he was going to be alive or dead. He came out the box, he was sweating profusely, and he got up and he came out of the box and started singing the 40th song. We know that many escaped Africans were resettled in Canada, places like Toronto, St. Catharines, Hamilton, Ontario, Kingston, and Chatham in Canada. I'll let you read about William and Ellen Craft. That's your reading assignment for this afternoon. William Still's accomplishments after the Civil War. He was a founder of the Christian Street YMCA in 1889. He was a leader in ending the segregation of streetcars in 1867. He was a member of the statewide Colored Independent Party. He gave an address called the Address on Voting and Laboring in 1874. At that time, he was endorsing an independent person that was running for mayor of the city. And at that time, a lot of blacks were Republicans. And he got a lot of flack for not voting Republican. So they asked him to come to a town hall meeting and give an address. And basically said to everybody, you need to take the time to learn about who you're voting for. Just don't vote on party lines because it's what everybody else is doing. Take the time and read about what's going on politically in the environment that you're getting ready to vote. Evidently, at that time, the Republican Party he thought was very much corrupt. And so did he think the Democratic Party too. The two parties were, in his mind, were corrupt, and he felt that this gentleman, who was an independent person, would do a better job. We know in 1902, his obituary in the New York Times reported he was known throughout the country as the father of the Underground Railroad. These are just some of the things that was the voting address that he did, voting and laboring, that was written by him. And then he wrote an article on his story on how the colored people of Philadelphia desegregated the city railroad cars. He was named to the Philadelphia Board of Trade by the Executive Committee. He was the first African American to sit on the Board of Trade in Philadelphia. His book, The Underground Railroad, was on expedition at the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition in 1876. He served on the board of Orphan Asylum for the children of Negro soldiers and sailors. He assisted in appointments of Philadelphia's first black police officers. He was a successful coal and wood stove merchant, as I've said before. Here's an endorsement from the North American United States Gazette, February 9th, 1867. This is like a testament of how he was looked upon about many people in the city of Philadelphia. We refer to William Still. He was one of the prime movers amongst the colored people of the city to secure for themselves proper means of social and intellectual advancement, and on many occasions he has shown a most proper spirit of liberality. In his business transaction, he has won a desirably high reputation for integrity and promptness. It's one of his quotes that he writes about. It's noted in the Underground Railroad book. Truth certainly fears no investigation. He wants that I go for liberty and improvement. So, and again, that's a lot of information, but there's a lot more information on William Still, and my opinion is that William Still should be the next statue that's sitting next to Octavius Cato around the City Hall of Philadelphia. But I talked earlier about one of the brothers named Peter Still and how he was left in slavery. Peter survived 40 years of being enslaved. He was able to buy his freedom in 1850 for $500 from two freedmen brothers. They were two Jewish merchants who owned Peter for a short time. In 1850, Freeman brothers released Peter in Ohio. There he traveled to Philadelphia where he met his brother William, who was the secretary at the time in the anti-slavery office. Now imagine that Peter walks into this office as Peter Freeman and starts talking to William, telling him the story about his mother's name was Sidney and his father's name was Levin, and that he had two sisters, Mahala and Katara. William suddenly recognizes that this gentleman was possibly his brother that his mother had been upset about leaving in slavery for over 40 some odd years. They reunited with the family in 1850. And during that time, his story got out to be well known in the newspapers that William Still had reunited with his long lost brother who was left in slavery. And there was a gentleman named Seth Conklin who helped organize an escape to free Peter's family. Peter became free, got reunited with his family, and then his eyes set on trying to free his family that he left in Alabama. And this whole story that was written about him called The Kidnapped and the Ransom is a phenomenal story. I could probably talk a whole extra hour on that whole topic itself. So you're gonna have to do some research on it, do some reading, purchase the book, but it's a phenomenal story. It really should be turned into a movie. I'm hoping one day I find enough money to get some investors so we can make his book a movie, his life story a movie. But part of the story is that the owner of his family ransomed Peter's wife and children for $5,000. And Peter spent from 1850 to 1855 going up through the Northeast, speaking to different organizations, speaking at churches, meeting a lot of heavyweights in the abolitionist movement, and he raised $5,000 in order to free his family after 5 years. They settled in Burlington City in New Jersey, and he had a successful truck, a farm. He grew produce and delivered it to market. Now, I feel like everybody usually has a favorite uncle. And when it comes to my family history, I think Dr. James Still was my favorite. Just to know that he only had 3 months of formal education. He practiced in herbal medicine, which was kind of typical back in those days. But he excelled at it. He distilled his own medicines, extracts from roots and herbs. You'll see there to the left, that is a Dr. James Still's hospital. He purchased that from a gentleman that said he would never sell it to him. The property went up for auction. Dr. Still put a bid on it. He went home that morning, figured he wasn't going to win. He comes back a couple hours later to check to see what happened. Lo and behold, he won the bid on the place. He was able to obtain a mortgage for the rest of it, and he ended up turning this tavern into a hospital, into an apartment complex, basically. Over to the right is his headstone, which is located in Colemantown Cemetery at Jacob's Chapel, AME in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. These are just some things that I ran into while I was doing some research. The picture up to that left, when I realized I knew what scrofolia was and congestive fever was, I was like, wow, I must be really getting better at this genealogy thing. Dr. Still was known to have a cure for scrofolia. He used local plants like Queen Anne's lace, sassafras root, skunk cabbage root, Virginia snake root, and tea berry. That picture there is a graphic artist rendition of his home. His office is still standing there to the left. His home unfortunately collapsed in 1930. It was a 3-story Victorian style house. He had running water, which meant that he had wells underneath, or cisterns underneath the floorboards of the foundation of the house, so you didn't have to go outside to get water. And that was modern technology back then. He studied books on anatomy, physiology, botany, and the preparation of medicines. He developed a treatment that was able to cure skin cancer, said. He treated all races of people. By the age of 70, he was the 3rd largest landowner in Medford, New Jersey area, Barnett County. This is just a quick photo of an archaeologist who did some research on Dr. James Still. It was part of an archaeological dig a few years ago. And this is just some of the property that he owned surrounding his home. His home was here. This is his office today. He owned, at the time of his death, he owned about $50,000 worth of property also in 1882. He notes in his book, Early Recollections of Dr. James Still's autobiography, in 1870, he documents the first Still reunion in his book. He took a naturalistic approach to curing ailments. He had this ointment called the Bulldog Sap, which being marketed and sold in different pharmacies throughout South Jersey. I think what's particularly incredible that he had in his book was his advice to young people, which is very applicable today. Stay out of drinking houses, be respectful to each other, save some money and buy property in order to gain wealth. And by the age of 50, he had paid off all his debt. One of his sons, James Jr., graduated Harvard Medical School in 1871. He was the 3rd African-American man to graduate from Harvard Medical School. Some of his quotes that he writes in his book. The laws of nature are justly executed. The rich, the poor, the learned, the unlearned, the king who rules a nation, or the beggar upon the wayside, all meet on a common level, humanity at the grave. Riches are gained more by saving that than by earning. It is no matter how much one earns, he can spend it all in less time than it took to earn it and still be poor. The man who is saving is often called mean and stingy. No doubt some are so, but I've often thought if it were not for some saving, there would be none to help another. A great mind is planted within us in the beginning of our lives, and like other plants, it needs cultivation and watering from the best fountains. So I list some of these references that I've read or had to work from, just so that people don't think I pulled this stuff out of thin air. First, the Underground Railroad, 1872. Dr. James Still's book, The Early Recollections and Life of Dr. James Still. The book that Cape Picard wrote, The Kidnapped and Ransomed, Narrative of Peter and Vina Still After 40 Years of Slavery. They were the 3 books that really helped keep a lot of family history together, but it took some other work to tie in some of the things that were missing from the story. Like if you read The Kidnapped and Ransomed, it makes it sound like Peter was kidnapped and ransomed, kidnapped from the plantation, and he wasn't kidnapped from the plantation. He was sold from plantation in Caroline County into Kentucky. The reason why that book is written that way is actually written in 1855. That's a correction there. It's 1855. It's written that way because at the time in 1855, his mother was still a fugitive, and they did not want to let anybody know that she was still living. So in Kate Picard's book, she changed the narrative of the story to reflect that Peter had been kidnapped. So there's some other books here that, and some, if you're really interested in Philadelphia history, especially Black history in Philadelphia. The book by Roger Lane, William Dorsey's Philadelphia and Ours, is really a phenomenal book about the socialites and the people the Blacks that lived in Philadelphia and worked in the community that they lived in. And everybody wants any copies of the list of references, you can email me, and you're more than welcome to send them to you. Henry Box Brown actually had written a narrative after he left, and that's 1916, not 1816. This is the Underground Railroad book that in 2005, I helped write this, the family preference, came out in 2005. My association now is currently underway, working with Stockton University down in Pomona, New Jersey, on getting this book back in we're going to reprint that book. The publisher that has this now is not interested in redoing a hardback, and we're going to reprint this book hopefully by the end of this year. We have that book. So we still have a few copies of that book for sale. This book here is a phenomenal children's book that was done by Don Tate. He's a phenomenal illustrator and author. He contacted me about 2 or 3 years ago, and he had some questions about the family history, and I helped him get it cleared up. And his work is just phenomenal. We do sell this book at our visitor center now. And these books here we also are up for sale: Kidnapped in a Ransom, the Early Recollections of Life of Dr. James Still. And the William Still book there, his life and works, is an actual article it was actual interview that was in a later edition of the Underground Railroad book that was only sold by subscription. And we thought it was necessary to pull that interview out and put that book and put that interview in print. It's probably about 30 or 40 pages. And then we added some other excerpts from the Underground Railroad book. But the interview was a very good insight on how clues that gave me to research my family history. This is me looking inside Dr. James Still's office that's still standing, that the state of New Jersey is now currently working on restoring it from the inside and out. Had a chance to go inside one day and look at it, and that whole day things were just kind of bothering me. I had a lot of stuff going on, and just kind of came to mind that day. I write, as a history enthusiast, I'm not interested in regurgitating the same old stories in order to satisfy the egos of a few historians. I'm interested in debunking the fake lore and encouraging people to find the truth about our ancestors. Far too long, our story has been told by others. It is long overdue for us to do our own research and tell our story. For many years, there were a lot of books that are written by my family that were written by other people that weren't family members, and they had the story all screwed up. It would bother me at night because I found out things that were incorrect about what they had written. Here is a picture to the left, is a picture of Dr. James Still's office prior to it being stabilized in 2019. After his office had fell down in 1932, the property was lost from the family. Dr. Still's daughter had lived in there for a while, and she had died and took a mortgage out on the property and never had a chance, never paid it back. So the property was lost out of family hand. And then his home actually fell down. His office stayed, and it was turned into a residence. And then in 2006, the family got together and got a DEP, New Jersey DEP involved, and they were able to purchase the property. And we saved it as a state park. It started out as 8 acres, went to 18 acres. Now it's at a total of 23-acre state park. What we do at the Dr. James Still State Park is that we bring children in, we bring groups in, and we talk about the life of Dr. James Still and his family at that time. Give the kids a chance to see a little bit of history, be able to go out and smell some of the herbs that he was growing, things that he might have used. We let them walk a nature trail, which is really a beautiful, beautiful piece of state park that we're just continually working on, trying to make it better. People really, truly enjoy it. It's out in Medford. Our visitor center is at 210 Medford Mahaly Road in Medford. These are just some of our volunteers. think this day, the picture down to the left-hand corner, I think that day we gave a presentation on how to make elderberry syrup. The one thing we started realizing that Dr. Still would want us to do, to teach about not only his history and his legacy, but to also teach about health and wellness in our community. So we're starting to work on programs for, how to make elderberry syrup to boost your immune system. I've got people who want to teach. We're going to teach yoga sometime coming up this summer, and have small classes and workshops, and get people to understand that it's okay to be healthy, and that you can do it naturally and you can do it holistically. So we have a couple people who are herbalists to help us out with that. We have a community garden that we're working on. We have herbal gardens we're working on. We're working on trying to build a greenhouse this year. So we got a lot of stuff going on, and we stay busy on the weekends best we can. Here is a new sign that we'll be putting up this spring in the parking lot, so you know where you're at when you pull up. We used to be located over here to the right on Church Road, 211 Church Road. But in 2019, 2020, New Jersey DEP got involved again and helped us purchase. The state purchased this property here in order to make us our visitor center. So that property was connected to the original state park, and so now we have like a 1.5 mile trails where the Boy Scouts come out and help develop it and do some really good, cool things out there. We've got a meadow out there. You'll see all kinds of wild turkeys. Sometimes we'll see coyotes out there. It's pretty interesting stuff you run into out there. So that pretty much concludes my presentation. If you have any more questions, you want to visit our website, it's www.drjamesstillcenter.org. Email me at drjamesstillcenter@gmail.com. And the nature trails and the grounds are open year round. The visitor center, it's located at 210 Medford Mahaly Road in Medford, New Jersey. The center is open on first and third Sundays of each month from 11:30 to 4:30, or by an appointment, either a group or a church group or school, homeschools. You want to set up, give us contact. We'll try to set up an appointment so I can have either myself or somebody else come out and give you a tour and give you kind of a background on the Still family. And please, if you're out in the Medford area, come by and take a look and visit. Really phenomenal place, and we're happy to be partnered up with the state of New Jersey. It's been a real great pleasure. I also give presentations like this in person. My February is booked, so you will need one, call me. I will try to make it later on in the year. So that pretty much concludes my presentation. I thank you to State Library for inviting me, and Cindy, thank you for contacting me. I much appreciate it. Thank you.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Peter. We'll go ahead and taking your questions now. So if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to send them over using the questions box. It looks like we can jump in. From one researcher to another, how do you navigate through the emotions of unraveling all this information?
Tough. When I found my third great grandfather's manumissions, I teared up. It was interesting. It's the emotion when you find something that's been kind of lost for a long time. And then you realize, for me, I realized that not many African Americans can do this. So I take a lot of honor in that, in trying to share it with people and encourage people. I believe our ancestors left breadcrumbs for us to find. I think we need to take the time to find it. Stop letting other people tell your story. Find it, dig through the archives, check those wills. A lot of wills passed on where, enslaved Africans were passed on to the next family member. And you have to just look for them. And it was a tough emotional ride.
What inspired you to start this whole experience?
There was a lot of questions that didn't click. There's a lot of stuff that didn't click for me. First, I would say it was early as a child. I had to read the Dr. James Still book as a summer reading from my mother, And then my father would always have me on the Pine Barrens because he was the last, my father's family was the last family that lived in the old original homestead of Leverett and Charity Still out in Chemont. So my father was considered one of the few Pineys of his time. So I was always out on the Pine Barrens. He was always showing me something, whether we're hunting or fishing. And as I got older, I knew other stories. I read the books, got a little deeper on the understanding, and then I would go to family reunions, and some things just didn't add up. And I really started digging deep into the history and trying to figure out, you know, answer some of those questions.
Are you accepting volunteer help at the historic site, such as cleaning trails, building birdhouses, etc.?
Yes, please. For many years, it was kind of a couple-person show, but now I've got a good team, but we need some help. We do service days. We're doing a service day April 9th at the center. We got a few activities we're trying to get done and trying to get ready for the spring. So yeah, more than welcome. Reach out to us through the email, and then I'll have somebody reach out to you.
With the pandemic happening, people and families have had a hard time to research their lineage. Has anyone come forward in relation to the Still family, and have you welcomed them to what you have found?
Sure, I do. I have. And there's a lot of people, that have come. I've reached out and found family in London. I found family in Boston area, some in Maryland too. So yeah, people have come, and some people have come and have thought they were part of Lebanon Charity Still progeny, and come to find out they may not have been. And that's been an eye opener for a lot of people too. It's been a lot because for many years everybody thought every Still member was family and we're all blood connected. And the honest truth of it is we're all not blood connected. But the story still remains. And what's important about whether you are blood related or not, I always say to people this: if it wasn't for the Still families already thriving and living in South Jersey when Lebanon and Charity came to New Jersey and took on the last name Still, my name or my history could be completely different. We could be the Smiths, we could be the Robinsons. Charity could have got recaptured and sent back into enslavement. So I am appreciative and very grateful for the Still families that were living and thriving in South Jersey. Because without them, this whole thing, I wouldn't be sitting here today.
I just want to share a couple comments as our questions keep coming in. What an amazing tribute to the Still family. I'm intrigued and look forward to reading and learning so much more. Thank you so much for your time today, Mr. Still. And this was a fantastic presentation and so detailed. What a great commitment. So some great comments coming in. Did Dr. Still leave any documentation, or did you find any of the recipes he used in his medicines?
The only recipes that we know that we have is the ones that he wrote in his early recollections and his autobiography. That's the only ones that we have. And the other thing that's interesting is that there's no documentation saying that Dr. James Still was an active part of the Underground Railroad. But being a historian and understanding the relationship between him and William Still, there's really a strong thought by inference that he was active working with William Still. We know in 1855 that Dr. James Still went with William Still to St. Catherine's to see the settlements that William was sending people to. So there's a good thought that he might have been partaking in the Underground Railroad. But as far as recipes, everything we have is listed in his book. And understand this too. Being an herbalist in 1855 in 1800s was a regular thing. Being an herbalist became kind of like witch doctor or negative when medicine was able to be synthesized. And then a lot of people who were herbalists were shunned upon. So, there's not a lot of his recipes were magical or anything like that. And also realize too that some of those recipes came from West Africa. West Africans brought some of the remedies with them, some of the ways how they distilled medicines. There's thought that Dr. Still learned all this from the Native Americans. I think he learned some about some of the native plants, but I think also that he learned things from his family, from his parents being from West Africa. Some of those, so there's a lot of combination. It's funny how people don't want to give African Americans credit for doing anything back in the 1800s, but besides being enslaved Africans. And it's so far from the truth.
I logged onto the webinar late. You may have addressed my question. Is it true that Dr. Still developed a cure for cancer?
It is said that he had a cure for cancer, yes. And matter of fact, when he died, a lot of obituaries throughout the country in black newspapers called him the cancer doctor, which is really, I've read that a few times and I was like floored by it. But I was always told that he had a cure for skin cancer, yes. What that cure is, I don't know, but it was said that he had one.
What days is the Still Center open, and are there any events planned for Black History Month?
We're open the first and third Sundays of every month. Right now, we don't have any current major events going on because we're doing so many presentations, and we have 3 or 4 in-person ones that my team has got to get ready for. We will be at the Kroc Center in Camden to do another presentation, 2 of them that night. I'm over at the St. Raymond's Catholic School on the 25th, and at the Kroc Center on the 25th. I'm also in Ocean City, New Jersey, for a presentation where we'll be selling our books. Anytime we're in person, we'll be selling books and selling some of our merchandise just to help offset some of the things that we have to do around the center. I will also be at the Hosanna School Museum February 26th down in Darlington, Maryland, which is part of the Hosanna School Museum, which is part of the Harvard Community College down there. The next biggest thing we're shooting for is April 9th, which would be our day of service. So come out and visit and get some fresh air. We're all going to need it.
A couple more comments. I'm just starting to research my heritage. I'm a Still descendant raised in Camden, Lawnside. As a child, attended many reunions. I live in Virginia, and I'm excited to learn more about the center and can't wait to visit. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you. Come visit. Send me an email. We can talk. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be talked about, but definitely. The South Jersey Stills, I would love to see some real champions dig into the family history, because there's a couple of thoughts about how the last name Still came about. I haven't found any white plantation owners in New Jersey named Still. Now, the thought is that they could come from the last name Still, which is Steele, which is S-T-I-H-L, which was our Dutch or German name. And later on, it just kind of phonetically got changed. But there's also a thought that back in the 1600s, people took on what they did for a living as their last name. Like if you was a stonemason, your last name might have been Mason or stone builder. But it's not far-fetched that from that plantation that John Hugg ran, he sold alcohol. He sold alcohol and he had people making his whiskey. Those enslaved Africans that was on that plantation might have been master distillers. They took on the last name Still, and that became their last name. So really, I would love to partner with somebody who's really doing some more in-depth history and digging into archives and wills and other things about the South Jersey Stills that were in South Jersey to find out why they were so prominent in South Jersey before Lebanon and Charity Still came. There's a story with that, and somebody really, really needs to dig into it. I've ran instances where there was a gentleman named Samuel A. Still in Merchantville that ran a school for colored children, and just phenomenal, and there's no history on it. There's nothing on it except for the fact that he ran this school. And, that history needs to be dug up and dug into and really uncovered, because it's a phenomenal story. I think their story is just as compelling as Lebanon and Charity Still, as William Still and Dr. James Still. Definitely. Someone just needs to take the time and really do some hard work.
Thank you for your time and commitment to sharing the Still story. I live in PA and was interested in learning more about William Still. Is there also a similar place or foundation honoring the life of William Still, or do you represent the Still family as a whole?
I represent the Lebanon Charity progeny. I represent the history that I've learned and researched. I'm not going to say I'm the spokesperson for all Still families, because there's a lot more there's stills all over the place. But the truth of the matter is that not every still is related. It's like saying every Robinson is related to Jackie Robinson. It's like saying that every Smith is related. And the truth of it is, it's just not. And that's something that if you're a researcher and you're trying to find your family heritage and you're a still family member, you really need to figure out where you tie in at, and it's really helpful. And that's something message, I've taken a lot of flack for that over the years, because everybody thought for a lot of years that every still member was all related. And the fact of the matter is we're all not blood related, but our history is important, and we can share that history and we can tell that history. I have no problem telling the history, as long as let's tell the history, because it needs to be told. It's important. Our kids need to know that they come from other than just being enslaved Africans in this country. That they had people in this country that gave significant importance to where they live and how they live. It's important that the children know this. You got to know where you know where you're going. You got to know where you come from.
Will you be at Lines on the Pines at Stockton College in March, and will you have books for sale?
Absolutely, absolutely. Lines of the Pines is March 13th, if I'm correct, and it's on a Sunday, and it's a wonderful event that highlights people from the Pine Barrens.
Alrighty, I don't see any other questions, so I think we can go ahead and end it there. Cindy, do you want to take us out?
I do. I want to thank everybody again who attended. Thank you, Samuel, for allowing us to have it recorded, and not that people won't come and, sometimes you like to listen to a recording, but at the same time, you still like to see the person, in person or at least virtually on the screen. It was an excellent history, and I did take a moment to go off the slides for a minute, just because it caught in my head. I wondered if we had a book, the book from William Still on Father on the Underground Railroad, and we do have it in our rare books collection. So we have a copy of that book from him, that was written by him. I know that you've updated it, but it said that the publishing date was 1872, and it's in our rare books collection. So I know that we really try at the State Library to have a good history and a good, encompassing history of what happened in the state. And, it's not always easy to get the books in that, but we do have that one. So I think sometimes people think that libraries only have current books, and not that you can check it out because it is a rare book, but we do have that one in there. And I'm just so thankful that I had to search around a little bit to try to find somebody, but I'm glad that I looked at that and saw the historical site and said, let's have somebody come and tell us a little bit more about the Still family. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We appreciate who you are, what you represent, and the history of your family and how it has affected New Jersey and America.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome to come out, and I'll make sure you get some of the newer books that you have at least have them in your library.
That would be fine. I might come out. Yeah, it's close to me. I need to do this. I like to see history. I used to go there with my dad. My dad's passed, but he loved history, and I do have that little bit of a bug in me as well. So,
awesome.
All right, thank you so much.
Thanks everybody for showing and great questions. And if you got any more questions or any more comments, please email me. If I can't get to it, I got some other historians that can answer some questions and help you along. But yeah, let's dig into those archives and those wills and start finding that real research, and let's tell our story. We need to tell our story other than somebody else doing it. Yeah. So we put our spin on it. That's the correct spin. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone. Be well.